Hello and welcome to Control-Delete Tutorials. My name is Jason. We got the different parts here, and I want to say something about these. You don't have to watch every part of these. I'm teaching a different thing in each one of these, and yes, they do build up to kind of one thing, but they also should stand alone. But I would recommend going back and checking these out in case you're missing something. So last video was part 5, so this one will be part 6. We got rigid body and jump setup. And then transform, translate, and rotate, so being able to move and rotate. A simple adding program, just showing how different methods work together, how if statements and different logic operators work, and other variables and methods. So go ahead and check those videos out. But now we'll get started on what we're doing in this video. So in this video, I want to focus primarily on triggers and colliders. What's the difference between them, and how do they work when dealing with them with programming? So we have a couple of methods that we'll mess around with. So we're actually not going to be applying a new script to the player, but we do need to go to the player because something I'm going to do is we're going to tag the player because we're going to use player tags here. And we're going to tag the player as player. That seems to make sense. So we're going to make sure we do that. And this is really helpful when we get into our next script. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up two areas that I can collide with. So one of them, I'll set up a 3D object, and this will be a capsule. And I'm just going to make this capsule something like, let's say 3 by 3 by 3. So it's going to be pretty big. And I'm going to put that out in front of us here, and I'm going to give that a color. So we have some colors here. I'm going to just duplicate my gray color that's on the ground, and I'm going to make my collider, let's say we make the collider red. I'll change the albedo color here to red, and we'll apply that. So this is going to be our collider object. I'm going to duplicate this, so let's call this collider, just for naming purposes. And I'll move this over this way a little bit, and move it down a little too. I don't need it to be huge. Alright, so there's our collider. It's a capsule collider. IsTrigger is turned off. We don't currently have a material type on it, so this type of material is not the same as these materials. These are physics materials, which means they can have different characteristics like being bouncy or having high friction, low friction, things like that. All the colliders are going to have different settings here. We did talk about them a little bit in one of the videos, but basically it's where the center point is of it. Some of them might do a radius, some of them, like the box collider, have different length, width, and height. This one also has a height, so we can change that. But I'm just going to leave those set to the defaults there. We can also change the direction of them. So we'll just stick that with Y. So that's going to be our collider object. And I'm going to move this, let's see, that's over 5. So we'll duplicate this one. So Control D to duplicate. I'll name the duplicate object trigger. And the only real difference here is I'm going to set this one to IsTrigger. And I'll move this one over -5. So it's on the other side. I actually moved that over in a different spot than I really meant to. I'll change that in just a second. I'm going to make it green just so it's easy to tell the difference here. And not only am I going to make it green, I'm going to set it to be transparent. And when I turn green on here, I have the option of changing the opacity, so I'm just going to make it semi-transparent. So when I apply this one we can see through. Now that distinction is triggers are passive. It means I can pass through them. I can also detect when an object has entered, stayed within, or exited my trigger area. Same idea with the collider, except for it's solid. We collide with it, we don't pass through it. So it's an active collider, a passive trigger. Okay, and just so these things are out in front of me, I'll move them over this direction here. And it doesn't really matter where we position these, but I'm going to be moving in this forward direction, so I want to be able to. So trigger on the left, collider on the right, and I can write one script to do something to both of these. Alright, so let's go to our scripts folder. We'll create a new C# script, and I'm going to call this, let's say, detection type, something like that. I don't know. Wait for our code to compile there in the bottom right. I'm going to select both of these objects, so I'll hold Control and select both, and I'm just going to drag this under Add Component, and that should add it to both. Let's check. Trigger and Collider both have that on there, so we can write one program to do both. Let's go ahead and double click to open this up. We shouldn't need our comments anymore, so we can go ahead and just delete those out of there. And actually, we're not going to use either one of these methods, so why don't we just clear this all out? All we have is the starter for our class. Alright, so we're going to start writing out our different methods here. So these should be private. So we'll start out with the private modifier. And our first one is going to be a void type. And we're going to do OnTriggerEnter. And in our parameters, we will put in Collider. And I like to name them other because we're always looking out for the other object that we're colliding with. We'll do our brackets and enter. Now we have three types here. Now I'm going to copy and paste these so I don't have to keep writing the same ones. So we'll do Control-C, Control-V, Control-V. So we have OnTriggerExit here. It's going to be another method we use. And then OnTriggerStay. And I'm going to put some comments above these just so we can define what they are. So the first one is going to be returns true for one frame when an object enters trigger area. And we'll copy and paste that. Now you don't have to copy and paste these if you don't want. I just want them here so we can define them. Returns true for one frame when an object exits the trigger area. And this one returns true from enter to exit. Okay, so this one will stay on the entire time, and we'll keep running the code kind of like update would, as long as there is an object staying within the trigger. So we have those ones for triggers. And then we have two main ones that I use for collision detection. So same idea. So I'm just going to, and I'll show you how these work differently. So we will just copy these. I'll paste them down below here. And this is going to be, so instead of trigger, we're going to have OnCollision. And this will be collision. And I will typically use COL to stand for the collider. Now we could also use other because it's always the other collider, but I like to keep these kind of separate so we don't mix them up. So let's copy and paste these here. Oops, got an extra O in there. Okay, COL. And that one. Now I don't use OnCollisionStay a lot. I typically will use OnCollisionEnter. This one is when the object exits the collision object. And same idea, collision. Alright, so currently I'm just going to print messages just so we can see how these are working. And we'll look at the console for this. So here we will say an object entered the trigger. Fairly simple. Here we will print a message that it has exited. And then an object is within the trigger. So when we enter, we'll get this message. When we exit, we'll get this message, and we'll get this one constantly the entire time. Okay, similar idea here. Print an object has, let's say, collided with the collider, I guess. It's fine. Copy that one. An object has detached from the collider, and an object is colliding with the collider. We want to make sure that all of these are set to collision, so make sure to check that. I did notice I left one of these as collider. I think it was these two. So if you want to check your script on those, make sure OnCollisionExit is collision col for collider. And then, yeah, so let's test this out. So Control-Shift-S, I'll go back into Unity, and we'll test these out. Let's make sure we turn collapse back on in case that's off. That way it's putting all of our messages together. And we will hit play. And so the first thing I'm going to do is try out trigger. So trigger should give me a message. So entered, an object is within the trigger, so this is going to continuously count up. And as I exit, we get an OnTriggerExit, and this one stops counting. So that works properly. I'm just going to clear that out while we're playing. And we'll try out the collider. Okay, I landed on it. An object collided with the collider. An object is attached to the collider. But you notice, there we go. We want to make sure it's only going to detect here as I'm moving. When I stop, it stops. Now, if I get off of it, I get an object has detached from the collider. So that's something to take note of, is how the detection is here. Okay, if the object keeps like pushing towards me, it'll keep on counting. And that's probably usually going to be the case depending on what you're doing. So now that we have those options, we can do different things. So instead of the print messages, and here I mostly want to focus on OnCollisionEnter and exit, not so much on OnTriggerEnter and exit, and OnCollisionEnter, because those are the ones I'm going to use most often. So I want to check whether or not the object is the player, because what if my ground is colliding? Now, I believe you need to have a rigid body on the detection object in order for it to detect. At least, I know that's the way it used to be in Unity. So here's what we're going to do. Here's how we detect what our object is if it's the player. So we're going to write in if, and if you haven't checked out the video on if statements, that would be good to check out. But here we have if, and we want to check whether the other object is a player. So we have this incoming other object that we're detecting. So we're going to say if that other object has a compare tag, and that tag is player, just like we had. Then we could print a different message here, or we could apply a force to this other object. So we could say something like other dot get component, rigid body dot add force, and we can add a, let's say, an upward force. So we'll do vector3 dot up multiplied by, I don't know, 50, and we'll have the force mode as impulse, kind of like our jump. So this would be like if I go into it, it's going to launch me when I enter. Okay, so that's only if it's the player object. So we'll save that out. I'm not going to get any other messages here, and we'll test to see if this works. Okay, so we'll clear this out, and we will see what happens. And there we go. So as soon as I go into it, I get launched upward pretty high, pretty fast. So let's turn that down a little bit. Let's just say multiplied by 10. And of course we can make a variable that we put in for this. Did it hit save? Yes, it did. Okay. Alright, so we'll try that again. There we go. So it pops me out. Alright, so that works. So just to recap that, if the other object has a compare tag of player, so if the object is tagged player, we get the other object, we get its rigid body component, so this has to assume that your player has a rigid body on it. We're going to do add force with an upward vector multiplied by 10 impulse. So that's one thing that we could do. We could do a similar thing, but it's going to be slightly different. So when we're using a collision object, it doesn't work like this. So if I paste this in, it's not going to work because this last part is not a part of col. We actually have to say col, the collision object, dot game object. And then I can paste the rest of that in. So it's a little bit different. So col.gameObject and then everything else. So you can see how these are slightly different. And again, we only want to do this if the object is our player. So let's say if col.gameObject dot compare tag is player. And we'll paste that back in. Okay, so again, this one is also different. You can see this one's just other.compare tag, and this one is col.gameObject.compare tag. And those are the main differences between the two on how you'll use them. And we can have them do exactly the same thing though. So now if I hit play, if I bump into the collision object here, it sends me up. Okay, so I could use this as some sort of knockback, so if I bump into an enemy, it doesn't keep hitting me, and I could have it knock me back opposite the direction. But I mainly just want to see how these can be used. And it bounces me off. Alright, so that's going to do it for this video. So hopefully you liked this video. If you did, give me a thumbs up or a like. And again, check out that 10,000K video. If I haven't already hit 10,000K by the time you see this. If you have, welcome. And as always, thanks for watching.